Brothers, good evening, and welcome to another edition of the District of Illinois Fireside Chat. I am Brother Leonard C. McInnes II, Illinois District Director, and I'm joined by the Illinois District Historian, Brother Chuck Smoot, who is also an historian with the Midwest region of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. Brothers, 118 years ago, our seven jewels inaugurated a change in the course of history. With the founding of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated, something miraculous happened in this world. And for 118 years, we have been the beneficiaries of their vision and the mission that they inaugurated. And so tonight is a tribute to our jewels, a tribute to those men whose courage and whose brave insights paved the new course in history for the lives of all the men who will be touched by what they planted on the campus of Cornell University. And so, Brother Smoot, I am excited tonight for this conversation. How you doing, brother?
I'm doing good. Absolutely. Definitely looking forward. We have a very distinguished panel of guests, and I'm looking forward to some enlightening conversation, and hopefully we can, drop a couple of nuggets that people aren't necessarily familiar with. So, I'm looking forward to that.
Good. Well, brothers, let's get to it. Brother Smoot, I am going to bring your panel to the stage and permit you the opportunity to introduce them, and then I will take a step back off stage and enjoy this discussion tonight. To all the brothers, do me a favor, share this, invite your line brothers, your chapter, tell them to come on and watch this conversation tonight. And most of all, to all those watching who are men of Alpha Phi Alpha, happy Founders Week. And we are now going to get to this, Brother Smoot. I'm going to add your panelists into the stage in this moment. Here we go.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, that was Brother Julius Hall. I had to mute him. Brother Hall, I'm going to try and unmute you real quick before we get started.
Okay.
We're still getting echo.
It's okay.
Brother Smoot, the floor is yours, brother.
All right. So brothers, so what we're gonna just to, as Brother McInnes mentioned, we are acknowledging 118 years of the fraternity, and that was a seminal action. And when Brother McInnes said he wanted to do this this event, so we can talk about the jewels, what they did, and how they started the organization, and and what their legacy was and is. But before we start with that, I want to do a brief introduction of the panelists. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to give a brief 30-second intro of yourself. Brother Hall, you want to start us off?
Brother Hall?
We're getting
some difficulties. Why don't we move on to someone else?
Yeah. Why don't we go, brother Legend? Why don't we do a quick introduction?
Sure. So my name is Lateef Legend, historian for Gamma Phi Lambda chapter in Oakland, California. I was initiated Zeta chapter spring 2005. Professionally, I've done worked at places like Stanford and at Columbia University doing in leadership roles regarding admissions and financial aid, and now been transitioned over and going to focusing on producing some historical scholarship. Most recently, a peer-reviewed paper that's going to be soon published on Yale's oldest Black student organization, Zeta chapter of Alpha Phi Alpha, and another article that's going to be published soon to be published in the Sphinx magazine, Frederick Douglass, Crossing the Sands in the Afterlife. So got a lot of heat over there. Love the history, love the brotherhood.
Right. All right. Thank you for that. Brother Sephora, you want to give us a brief introduction? Brother Sephora, you're muted.
Good evening, Brother Lateef Sephora, the other Lateef.
Yeah.
I am currently serve as the Midwestern region co-chair of the historical commission. Alongside Brother Smoot, past president of Delta Alpha Lambda chapter, current historian of Delta Alpha Lambda chapter, initiated Alpha Zeta chapter, March 13, 1992. And I'm glad to be here this evening. Oh, and author of the Alpha Motif.
Yeah, you definitely had to mention that, brother.
Right, like let them know, man.
Brother Legend, you beat me to it because I was just going to pull mine out. So it's and let me, for those who are not aware, just a quick introduction of myself. My name is Brother Chuck Smoot. I'm a 1987 initiate of Theta chapter. I'm currently affiliated with the Xi Lambda chapter. I have the pleasure of serving as the district historian, and as Brother Safor mentioned, serve with him as a co-chair on the Regional Historical Commission. And I also wrote a book, Jewel of the Midwest. We'll pop that out at one point so people can see that. But just really happy to have you brothers there. Let's try Brother Hall one more time.
Still got an echo.
Yeah, it's still. Yeah, Brother Hall, we still have feedback and an echo coming from you.
Check to see if he has like two applications open at the same time. Is that? But we're gonna figure it out. Yeah, we'll see.
While they're working that out, let's get started. So we have our 7 jewels who are Henry Arthur Callis, Charles Henry Chapman, Eugene Kinkle Jones, George Biddle Kelly, Nathaniel Allison Murray, Robert Harold Ogle, and Vertner Woodson Tandy. Brothers, let's start with this. Let's talk a little bit about the organization of the jewels and how they came together, and how they formed the brotherhood that we are so familiar with.
I think it's important to acknowledge where they resided or where they came from, in terms of each having a particular origin story, geographically speaking. And Jewel Callis certainly was from New York. Chapman, New York, by way of DC, in terms of the HBCU that Howard that he attended. Jewel Eugene Kiko Jones from Richmond, or from Virginia, a graduate of Virginia Union. Jewel George Biddle Kelly from New York. Jewel Nathaniel Allison Murray from DC. Jewel Robert Harold Ogle, also from the DC area. And then Jewel Vertner Woodson Tandy from Kentucky, by way of Tuskegee, Alabama. And it's important to acknowledge where all of them were from, and the HBCUs, many of them were graduates from, because they arrived some earlier than others. Jewel Chapman was already there at Cornell as early as 1900. And as the others arrive, they are coming already, for the most part, with the exception of Jewel Callis, with some exposure to higher education. And so, because they are coming from some HBCUs, some PWIs, and different geographic locations, some Southern, some Eastern, they're coming with these experiences already in tow in terms of who they are, uh, the experiences that they bring to the table. And so when they arrive on campus collectively in 1905, this is what they're bringing to the table. Experiences from other higher education institutions and experience from geographic locations in terms of their upbringing.
So I wanted to add something. Can you all hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Very clear.
Okay. Going back to that time, they didn't just happen on Cornell's campus.
Right.
This was at the end of Reconstruction, the beginning of Jim Crow, and their families succeeded during Reconstruction. Went from slavery to their parents were educators or contractors, and somehow they allowed their sons to travel to upstate New York, which is huge. In 1905, 1906, they didn't live on campus, but they were allowed to enter. Unlike places like University of Georgia or Ole Miss, they could go up there for greater education.
Yeah. And matter of fact, I would like to add or piggyback from that. I think got to introduce Frederick Douglass in the conversation. I think he's a major contributor in the sense that, he passed away in 1895. And that's the same year that Booker T. Washington gave his famous speech, the Atlantic Compromise. And when this is where you start to see the rising star of Du Bois, and these, I would say the genesis of them, going at it philosophically when it comes to the direction of Negro people at the time. And so those things kind of play in the background as they approach Cornell University. And then I think the other component is as we have the Niagara movement, right? This is a significant moment that influenced and shaped the minds of our jewels.
Brother Legend, just real briefly, can you extrapolate on what the Niagara movement was?
Yes. So the Niagara movement was the brainchild of W.E.B. Du Bois, as well as William Trotter and many others, where they had a secret meeting in Niagara Falls to discuss. There was a myriad of things, but basically the upliftment of Black people. And in that first meeting, one of the things that came up was this manifesto for college men. And that was to, we want to have a junior Niagara movement. And so this was they tried to do a call to action to many of the Black male students across the college campuses in the country. And this was some of the things that kind of led up to, again, many building blocks that led up to the establishment of our fraternity.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, mind you, this was before the 1918 riots after World War I, when we met great hostility across the nation in St. Louis, Chicago, for trying to exert some degree of independence. So we're talking about almost 20 years earlier. They were trying to form an organization.
Yeah.
And so if I can add what Brother Hall mentioned in terms of them not just having to just wander onto Cornell's campus in terms of what was the draw. And Ezra Cornell had this on his seal. And on that seal was, I founded an institution where everyone seeking instruction can do so. And I'm paraphrasing. and that sits on the Cornell seal to suggest that certainly was a marketing campaign to attract particular students, whether it was African Americans, immigrants, and women. And the reason why that's significant is because the other institutions wasn't particularly recruiting that particular student and so because Cornell at the time was considered the new university or new kid on the block, they certainly needed to keep their doors open and sought that as a very aggressive marketing campaign to attract students that other universities was not actively recruiting for.
So let me ask, it seems like when we talk about the Jewels and how they came together, it seems like it happened in almost a perfect storm, that these men came together and were able to share a vision. Can any of you all talk about the some of the difficulties and some of the issues that they faced starting the organization?
Oh, I mean, I think I would like to talk about just racism itself, right? I mean, this is a period where we're talking about people dealing with lynching, right? This is a real thing. But not only that, you have the fact that you get on campus, but you can't have the same privileges and rights and benefits as your white counterpart. So, if you was a male student, you couldn't just be in a dormitory, join a fraternity, right?
Right.
You had to, live in someone else's home and then have to walk or take the bike, or you had to take the longer road to get to that class, right? And this is, I mean, although this was what was happening in Cornell, this was also happening across the country, right? But to know that this was a documented experience at Cornell, I think, again, these were some of the many obstacles that they were trying to deal with. They were dealing with students being enrolled for one semester and then dropping out.
Right. Well, Brother Safor, I mean, I think these are some of the things you kind of dealt with in the Alpha Motif, your book. Can you highlight some of those issues of what it was like for them in the fall of 1906?
So certainly their experienced levels of racism in terms of there were some white students that refused to share a classroom with them and withdrew out of the class. Some of their the registration forms had the word colored on it so that the registrar would know that they were African American. And so there certainly was this intentional denial of the African American women being able to stay in the dorms. And so what's interesting about that dynamic is that even though the men couldn't stay in the dorm and they stayed in the boarding houses off campus, as Brother Legend mentioned, they certainly was fighting for the rights for the African American female students to stay in Sage Hall in the dorms. And so the Jewels and the early initiates didn't waste any time highlighting what those issues were. And Jewel Tandy and James B. Clark took that head on in terms of the prejudice that was there. James B. Clark and Jewel Tandy were both fighting for the rights for African American female students to have access to the dorms. And they both challenged, well, if I pay tuition just like everyone else, why can't I have access to the cafeteria? And why can't we have access to the dorms? And so those are examples of the Black experience at Cornell, which is highlighted in the book that is described to give the reader an opportunity to understand what it was like being a student there on campus.
Can I go back a little bit?
Mm-hmm.
I never introduced myself.
Yeah.
I'm Julius Hall. Alpha Mu Northwestern. And not to interject, but we had the same thing going on at Northwestern. Black men, actually, two brothers integrated dorms in 1951. But let me tell you, when I was accepted, a neighbor summoned me in 1978, 1977. She'd heard that I was going to Northwestern, and she said, I commuted. And it never dawned on me at the time. I'm like, okay, well, she commuted in the early 50s because she couldn't live on campus.
Right.
It never crossed my mind.
Wow.
Right.
They also experienced some challenges in the classroom with some of the white counterparts trying to accuse them or suggesting that they wasn't being honest during their examinations. And so they faced a lot of racism there, just being the studious students that they were, having to worry about false accusations.
Right.
And so to endure that and overcome that in the classroom itself was an exemplary example of perseverance.
May I add one more point? And this is to kind of further elaborate or expound on what Brother Spoor mentioned about women. Mary Church Terrell in 1906, I believe in May, she was like the first woman, not just, like based on the press release, she's the first woman to be invited to speak in front of the student body. And that her speech was very impactful because for these whites, many of these students, come from the scallions of Southern scallions of the world. Like, to see a Gus woman to be articulate, she graduated from Oberlin. I mean, she's establishing these organizations, and you could tell that was that speech, that moment definitely changed something throughout the entire university, right? And along with you having Du Bois, right, having these conversations, hey guys, keep your head up, I got you, like providing that extra support. And he was not just doing it for Cornell students, he was doing this for like across the country. So I think that this is some of the pieces that just kind of understand what was leading up to the development of this fraternity. And I think that Mary Church Terrell is an interesting moment.
Now,
Certainly.
Now, what I want to do is I want to talk briefly about each of the jewels individually. First we usually go alphabetical order. So we have Henry Arthur Callis. I have a personal affinity for Brother Callis with him, having been a member of Theta chapter and a charter member of Xi Lambda chapter. But Brother Callis had a very distinguished medical career, both in Chicago and in DC. Can somebody talk about that real quick?
Well, I was going to say, before we talk about that, I think when we talk about some of the jewels coming from HBCUs, I think this other piece of being boomeranging, like after you graduate from an Ivy League school, going into teach or going back to an HBCU to kind of share your knowledge. And with Callis, Jewel Callis, this man, I mean, one of my favorite jewels also, to just see, the game plan was always to be a student, but he was also an educator. He was teaching in high school, and so he got married to Allison Dunbar Nelson, famous poet, literary scholar, but the relationship didn't last that long because he wanted to have kids with her, and and she was like, no, I don't want any children. And so then they had their divorce, and then he goes to Chicago. But I don't know if any brothers want to add to that.
I certainly want to talk briefly on his contribution to caring for veterans in Tuskegee.
Yes.
During the time of 1927 and 1930. That certainly shows his passion for patients, and particularly that population that certainly was probably living in two worlds, the racism and maybe poor health in the country, and also perhaps in the military as well. And
Right.
in his role as a physician to make sure that all the veterans were taken care of, and certainly making sure that the African-American veterans are receiving the care that they deserve. That's number one. Number two is his commitment to educating the next generation of physicians at Howard University, in which he did so between 1930 and 1939. And that says something about him giving back and understanding the importance of the physician with diverse background, diverse perspective, providing care to the world. It's also important to point out the number of specialties that he had as a physician. Today, you're accustomed to a physician having one specialty. They go to medical school, they do their residency, they do their fellowship, and it's usually in one area. But just counting through those, he was a pathologist, he was a primary care physician, a microbiologist, heart specialist, and professor throughout his career as a medical practitioner. And I find that to be impressive, regardless of what time frame we're talking about. It's impressive. It's impressive then. It certainly is impressive now to have such a commitment to medical training and be a multi-specialist in these different areas.
Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about Joel Chapman. Anybody want to tackle that one?
Well, with Joel Chapman, his particular history, we know that he was doing some work with Howard University a little bit after the founding of the fraternity. And I know he eventually moved to Florida, but I think he also, if I'm not mistaken, I'm doing this from memory, but he went to Tuskegee for a brief spell, if I'm not mistaken. But then eventually settled in at Florida A&M and became a professor.
Okay.
And that's the most I could think of off the top of my head from memory.
Well, I did a little bit of research on him, and my understanding is that he first went to Alabama A&M.
Yes, that's what it is.
And then FAMU. The intriguing part I read was he's mentioned in entering Omega chapter twice in our records.
Right.
In 1922 and 1934. So there's some discrepancy there, which is why we are doing this.
Yeah, I mean, and also got to take in consideration the technology of that time, right?
Correct.
The main mode of communication was writing letters, newspapers. This is the way information was shared, and so we have these guilty pleasures right now where we can have a video conference and we could be in different states and meet to have these conversations. These things wasn't available at the time, and so staying engaged with some of these individuals, it wasn't as easy as we have it today.
Right.
It's also important to point out his commitment to the profession of agriculture.
He
was taking what I would consider to be continuing education courses at Cornell from 1900. It's well into 1918. The different courses that were offered. Yeah. And so while he was an entrepreneur, being an owner of a brick company. And so he's doing these things while he's still there in Ithaca. So by the time he goes on his career tour at Alabama A&M, he's also spent some time at Jackson State, and then Florida A&M. He arrives at Florida A&M as a seasoned professional in agriculture, and not only is he teaching the course to students, but he's also teaching farmers how to be better farmers and better astute in having economic stability. Because during that time, farmers were being cheated out of their crops. And it's a point that W.B. Du Bois challenged one of their Cornell professors on, stating that the African-American farmers were not getting a fair shake. So he and Jewel Murray, which we'll get into later, played an integral part in not only teaching agriculture subject matter, but certainly making a difference in the lives of the farmers who they were able to mentor and also teach the fundamentals of farming so that they could be economically independent and stable.
And can I add, just like from a technology standpoint, when it comes to agriculture, it would for some of the younger folks, it is akin to like what like engineering is today. That was agriculture back then. This was a major industry. And so to have that type of influence where you're educating farmers on how to develop their crops and best practices, this was a very crucial and important industry for Black people, especially post Reconstruction.
Okay, all right. Let's.
And of course, he chartered Beta Nu.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. We can't forget that. He chartered member of Beta Nu chapter. But let's talk about Eugene Kinkle Jones. And I know this is one that we could talk about for an hour, so let's try to condense this one. But if we can talk a little bit about Jewel Jones's accomplishments as both as a Jewel and outside of his work with the fraternity.
I will let you go first. This is my favorite Jewel. I don't know where I learned that, somewhere pledging in 1978. But his Urban League Foundation, and I call him the Moses of Alpha because he spread chapters throughout the nation. He didn't just stop. He went to Canada. He went down to Howard and Richmond. He really was a lot. Someone told me, though, someone on our historian committee said that anecdotally, he kind of like lobbied to become a Jewel, like in the 1940s.
Right.
Whereas, he was not initially a Jewel. So I just wanted to bring that up there. But he's still my favorite Jewel. And a roommate, I understand, of Tandy.
Right. And we'll definitely bring up Tandy. I mean, I think one of the things that for me is interesting about Jones, that he was a part of the Franklin Delano Roosevelt's Black Cabinet. And he was helping to make policy and impact policy for Black people, for African Americans, having the ear of the president at the time, even though it is assumed that he was put on that committee at the urging of Eleanor Roosevelt.
Right.
The fact that he was able to have that type of impact and to work on policy decisions and setting up policy issues for African Americans in Indiana. I've always found that to be extremely impressive.
And he did a deep dive with those policies as it relates to equal access to federal benefits, employment, job training, the integration of the military. Certainly fought for the integration of the federal workforce And so you could tell that while he was there in DC, he was certainly looking at these different changes in the workforce from a very national standpoint at a federal level, and using his role in this cabinet to bring about those changes. But he was targeting specific policies germane to the work that he was already doing in New York. And so he brought a bandwidth of experience, a large bandwidth of experience when trying to shape and design policies, labor-related
I want to add this connection. So again, the National Urban League in context with the NAACP. NAACP was established in 1909. The National Urban League was established in 1910. He was like one of the early members, early executive leaders, but the co-founder of the National Urban League, George Edmund Haynes, he was an alpha man as well. And so, and you could see that as he's setting up this organization, he's enlisting alpha men to help in this assistance of this illustrious organization. And you see the same thing that's happening with the NAACP with Du Bois, right? So again, you're just seeing this continual this effort of uplifting the community through organizing.
Right.
Yes, and someone brought up a good point. The only jewel to have his father is a brother as well as his son.
Right.
I think that's important. Second is Eugene Kinkle-Jones Sr., right? Because yes, we have another alpha, there's Eugene Kinkle-Jones Jr. So I think that's, so very deep to see the family so integrated, not just through blood, but through fraternal as well.
Okay, so we have a question. Do you believe Eugene Kinkle-Jones's family status also played a role in his ability to successfully expand chapters for the organization, i.e., with his father being a professor, with his father having taught at Virginia Union? What? Anybody want to tackle that question?
Yeah, I know where I'm tackling that. I would say the importance of George Edom Jones becoming a member of this organization. He was so you got Virginia Union that was like, they are known for cranking out preachers, right? And he is one of the lead faculty that's educating some of the best preachers in the United States. Like if you want to be a notable preacher through education, you go to Virginia Union, you get taught by George Edom Jones. Right. And so that early push to as Gamma chapters is growing, you're having not just the members as undergraduate students, but in the faculty, right? At the highest levels of HBCU. And I think that it definitely played an influential role. Him having his family being so involved, but also he was the second president of the fraternity.
Right.
Like, so I think that's another piece. He like going into the 1907 year, he is quickly taking into this leadership role as one of the first initiates, but also helping out with, that led to like the incorporation and data and whatnot. Right. So, yeah.
Well, my understanding is that I'm just imagining this when I joined 46 years ago, reading history book. Spring break, maybe, or Christmas break, he had to jump on the bus to go home to visit his family. And the bus had to go from New York through DC. And he got off and said, you know what? I'm going to start Beta Chapter. Just like that. He seized the opportunity.
Yeah. And then not only that, with Beta Chapter, then Gamma Chapter, and then, later on, hey, we're going to go spring break. And mind you, the significance of Delta Chapter, again, I don't know if they recognize that what they were doing with this, but literally you go into another country to establish another organization, which makes Alpha become this international organization.
Right.
Yeah.
Very early. Like, that's significant.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, let's talk a little bit about George Biddle Kelly.
Yes.
Excuse me, brothers. But yeah, if we can talk a little bit about George Biddle Kelly.
So he's my favorite Jewel.
Really?
So being the only one during that time who was a transfer student, so he's coming from another institution. But while he's at RPI, Resner Polytechnical Institute, he gains quite a bit of a reputation there, being a member of one of the student engineering societies, being known for whistling through the halls that's said to resemble that of an organ pipe or a steamboat. And so he seemed to be very popular among the student body there. And then to transfer because he saw that he would have more economic success at Cornell, being a more affordable school than RPI. And so he transfers there. But when he arrives there, he instantly realizes that there were African Americans there who laid the foundation for being a student there. And so it almost seemed like he stepped back and made this observation. And what he was able to see was that when they arrived in 1905, he realized that that student body was among the most in Cornell's history in terms of the number of African Americans who were there during that time. And he indicated that he does acknowledge that though there were students there prior, they've had some challenges academically and financially, ended up having to leave. But he was proud to say that the group that was there with him was not only there, but there with the intent of being successful. And he acknowledges that the African American women there who was there with them represented the best of the race, represented a certain high quality of the race. And he also references them meeting at this elm tree on campus and talking amongst themselves, saying that this is a do or die type situation. We must be successful. There's no other alternative but to be successful. And his level of humility, his level of observation, understanding, seeking the moment, taking the moment as he has it, and being such an inspiration. Every time he told stories, he provided some type of visual, and you get this early description of what the brotherhood was like in terms of them bouncing ideas off of each other. He talks about the time that he graduated and was going on a date and found himself a little short financially, and reached back out to the brothers, and they, was there to assist him a little bit, and that just shows what the brotherhood was like, and how certainly can lean on each other. Jewel Tandy and Jewel Callis stayed with him over the break in Troy instead of going home. And so that aspect of early examples of the brotherhood that he displayed, and they all displayed for each other, resonates with me at a very high level. And certainly the fact that he was an engineering major there on campus, working on sewer, working on the technology or the advancement of sewer designs. And what's very important about that, the work that he was working on, is that prior to 1905 and 1903, there was a typhoid outbreak in Ithaca, which claimed about 89 students. And so you can imagine the perspective that he brought to the table coming in as a student, realizing that the design of the sewer system there in Ithaca 2 years prior had some challenges, and he had a lot of ideas on how to fix those. And that resonates with me, being a young student, having such a large perspective on how to solve the world's problems.
So my understanding is that he changed professions at one point.
He did. He was working at a barge canal there in New York, and then changed from his role as an engineer and became a tax auditor for the State Department, State Tax Department.
Right.
And
before we go to the next jewel, there's a question. Panel, can you address the growing rhetoric towards our founders being a part of the Masonic order and wanted idolatry worship of demonic symbols that is spreading throughout social media? I'll say there's no truth to any of that.
Not at all. Far from it, actually.
No. I mean, just very, very simple.
But no, I'll add a little bit further to this. So, if you're talking about like the early 1900s, in terms of the Christian faith, a lot of these guys were deeply into their faith. They went to church, and the Zion is referenced literally in our history book, and also based on just the makeup of the earliest members of the fraternity, many of these guys were ministers, bishops, reverends, and of different denominations. And their faith was something that was extremely important to them. And so to this notion that they wanted to, demonic symbols. I mean, it's like it. At that time, being excommunicated could have ended your literally. If you had a business, if no one was going to speak to you anymore, no one's going to your business. You would have to move to another town and start a brand new life. So, and I think that it's important to kind of highlight the importance of one, how deep their faith was just as a group of people. And the intentions of creating this organization was never to be any of this idolatry worship, and not like that. Just doesn't make sense.
Right.
And I doubt that Theodore Alton would have invited them to his church, his AME church,
Exactly.
in an event and worship there if he had some questions about the levels of faith. And so I would say that this is completely false.
Okay. Now let's go forward. Nathaniel Allison Murray.
That brother. So Jewel Murray, I mean, coming from one of the wealthiest Black families in the country, almost, I would say, the It family in DC, and him teaching at one of the premier Black high schools in the country. Like, you go to M Street, you have opportunities not to just go to Cornell. You're talking about Yale, UPenn, Harvard. Yes,
What is this famous quote?
Oh man, which one? There's so many of them.
Fight on ice.
Oh, that's Tandy. That's Tandy.
That's Tandy. Oh, okay.
Yeah. But
I lost my laptop, but I had his famous quote because I'm on the phone. But he has a lot of famous quotes.
Yeah. I mean, the other piece about Murray was that, again, he was very deeply involved with the fraternity, played a significant role with the historical commission for the fraternity, and was just very involved. Like, this man I don't know if he. See, I don't know. I don't have this information. I don't want to speculate, but you see him at many of the general conventions more consistently than some of the other jewels, and just really cared about making sure that the organization evolves, get better, and improve. So
he's another one of our jewels who had an HBCU experience, graduating from Hampton, and then attending Cornell for 2 years. Then he spent some time at University of Maryland Eastern Shore, then came back to Cornell and finished. He certainly was into agriculture, really heavy, was a advocate of gardens, and did that also in DC while at Cornell, and would seek and get employment because of his agriculture skills and being able to maintain a large school garden, which he did so at West Virginia Collegiate Institute, my alma mater, and set the tone for the Black farmers to be successful there as well. And he was very active while he was there for the 4 years he was at that institution. Yeah. And certainly was the first, one of the first professors of agriculture there while he was there.
And let's move forward. We're coming up on time, so let's discuss briefly Jewel Robert Harold Ogle.
My understanding is he was in the secretarial field, and he worked where I did on Capitol Hill soon after he graduated. And he used to live in D.C., and he was a neighbor, 17th and T in D.C., which was at the time the mecca of the Black community, not far from Howard. And my church at the time on 9th and P. That was a whole Black area of D.C. No longer. It's now been gentrified.
Okay.
But that's all I have on him. He also helped charter Mulander chapter.
Right.
Well, he was a single parent, raising 2 daughters because he lost his wife during when she was giving birth to her second child. Of course, he did work in D.C. We don't know much about the particular policies that he might have been working on when he was working for Senator Francis Warren. But he was probably a policymaker as well, working behind the scenes, working for the Committee on Appropriations of the United States Senate in 1919.
Right.
And so, and he certainly served as a clerk for Judge James A. Cobb's court as well. And so,
being a secretary back then was a big deal.
Yes. Right.
My mom was a secretary. Being able to type, communicate was a big deal.
Absolutely.
Especially if you're talking about like some of the most powerful politicians of the day, like those as a Black person to that's rare, very rare.
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's move forward to my favorite jewel.
Yes, my favorite too.
So, brothers, if you can speak on Jewel Tandy for a brief moment.
Man, I mean, this guy was being mentored by some of the most brilliant Black leaders, from Booker T. Washington to Tuskegee. I forgot the other famous architect. It's escaping me. But his father, like he just grew up with just having the right people to nurture his God gift to literally be an architect and create some of the most beautiful, influential buildings that still exist to this very day.
Right.
I think you might be searching for, was it Robert Taylor out of MIT?
Yes. That's the person. It was escaping me.
From MIT, first African American. And so he certainly had a lot of training in Tuskegee. having the exposure, and maybe we even go back to Kentucky, working with his father in construction, and then going to Tuskegee and getting some formal training in architecture, and then going on to Cornell, and by that time finding himself in company of other architectural students, and also finding himself winning architectural awards for his architectural design. I believe he designed a swimming pool. And he made the paper, the Cornell Sun, for being exemplary in his skill sets as an architectural student.
So how do you go from being in Kentucky, Jim Crow, well, maybe this is before Jim Crow, your father was a successful contractor, constructing buildings in the Jim Crow era, or maybe pre-Jim Crow era, and you had to get out of there to go get your formal education because you couldn't go to the University of Kentucky. So he ended up at Cornell.
Right. Okay. Now, as we get ready to wind down, I would like to ask each of you to briefly comment on what you think the legacy of the Jewels are and the legacy of the organization in general. Brother Hall, we'll start with you.
Well, the legacy I have rediscovered is that these guys are from the 1880s era, and by the time we got to college, it was 1906. So they learned a lot. The fact that they came to Cornell out of nowhere, I mean, that took a lot of effort to apply, get accepted, and not only in there, they formed a great organization and continued their service for the rest of their lives.
Right. Okay.
Jewel Kelly wrote in the 50th anniversary of the Sphinx magazine, which is the August 1956 issue, indicating that the Jewels used their training at Cornell to combat the world.
Yes.
That resonated and should resonate with all of us, because we accept them as providing that foundation for us all. And so they're using the training to combat the world. That is resonating and filtering down to us as members of this fraternity. And it is an ongoing charge for us to combat the world and invoke change and provide a great deal of purpose to these things that we know could use to be changed, sustained, and impacted in a very intentional way. And so for me, it's that quote itself, because it is an ongoing living charge for us as members of this fraternity.
And Brother Legend?
I want to just continue this theme that the Jewels themselves sent us lots of messages, documented messages about this theme of fighting. We have to fight. You got Jewel Kelly, who talked about combating. And you have Tandy said, we fight on ice. But one quote that I want to add is, and especially the times that we're living in today, Jewel Callis, and this is from the Life and Legacy book, pages 281 to 282. Alpha Phi Alpha was born in the shadows of slavery, on the lap of disenfranchisement. We propose to foster scholarship and excellence among students, to bring leadership and vision to the social problems of our communities and the nation, to fight with the courage and self-sacrifice every bar to the democratic way of life. So long as we swerve not from these purposes, Alpha Phi Alpha lives.
Amen.
Well, brothers, I do want to thank you. This has been a very enlightening discussion. I want to thank all three of you brothers for taking time out of your very busy schedules to share with the District of Illinois. And I hope that brothers have gotten something out of it. Our district director, Brother Leonard McInnes, unfortunately, he had another commitment that he had to hop onto. But on behalf of him and the entire District of Illinois, we do want to thank you all for sharing your information, for sharing your knowledge, for sharing your passion with us for this organization. I want to wish each and every one of you a happy 118th Founders Day, and we definitely will be seeing you again soon. All right?
We'll see.
All right, brothers. Thank you.